Today on the show, we are joined by Sharon Chin. Sharon is a senior human resources professional who is currently responsible for the people strategy at Nordstrom, which includes talent management, employee engagement, and management development. She joins us today to talk about how she was able to achieve balance between work and life. This is the Career Cue, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Stacey Harris.
So welcome to the show, Sharon. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you, Stacey.
It's so nice of you to come in, especially now. It may not be snowing on the day that we release this, but it's definitely a snow day today.
Yes.
So thanks for making the trek in. We know how Seattle can shut down whenever there's a flake or two.
Yes, and I'm a true Seattleite, too. I actually grew up in the area, so anytime the snow hits the ground, I'm at home.
Hunker down.
Hunker down. I'm not driving my car.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you changed the rules for us for today. I appreciate that. So, Sharon, you have a really interesting perspective on how to think about getting work to fit into your life. So, how do you do it, and what is your point of view on that?
Yeah. Thanks, Stacey. The thing that you hear about so often is like work-life balance. You know, in any company or any job you hear about, how do you manage work-life balance? My take on it is a little bit different. It's not, managing, how to balance work and manage and life and how to all sort of fits together. My take on it is, how do you get work to fit into your life? My point of view around that, it came to me as an aha many years ago when I was working at Microsoft. I was in a session with a corporate vice president there. Her name is Kathleen Hogan. She's now the EVP of HR at Microsoft. Yeah. I remember sitting in this big meeting. There's probably like 1,000 people. And Kathleen said, make Microsoft work for you. And I thought about that and I was like, well, what does that mean? And how would I make Microsoft work for me? And it really hit home for me and it really got me thinking, it's not about me working for Microsoft. It's how does Microsoft work for me? And it really put me in a different perspective and a different lens about how I think about that issue around work-life balance. Because when I think about like what's most important to me, the most important thing to me is my family. I have a great husband. I have 2 young children and all that. And, they're first and foremost my biggest priority. So when I think about my life with them, how do I think about work fitting into that life? And that's the perspective that as I entered this new job that I took a couple months ago at Nordstrom, how do I ensure that I send the message that my life is first and work sort of fits into how I run my life? And I wanted to be able to clearly communicate that when I started in the role and make sure that it was going to work for me. So selfishly.
Well, because if you're not looking after yourself,
yes,
right, you have to look after yourself before you can look after others.
Exactly.
And to your point about clearly communicating it, right, whether it be with an existing employer, right, if you go through a life change, or with a new employer, as you're in those conversations.
Absolutely. So, if I think about, like what this looks like for people, how does this kind of pan out? I think about, like, first of all, identifying, like, what's most important to you as a person. For me, it's my family. Family priorities are critical for me. So how do I, again, make that work sort of fit into family life? Other people might have different priorities, around being healthy or training for a marathon or, things like that. Thinking and identifying what that thing is for you as a person. And then secondly, like, piecing that all together. Like, for me, how I do it is think about, like, the chunks of my life that are life, family stuff, calendar stuff, activities that we have going on. And then somehow I wrap the work stuff around it. So what that might look like is I work from, 6 to 8 o'clock in the morning. I get the kids ready, drop them off at school, go to work, do the work thing. I generally leave around 4, 5 o'clock, get home, eat dinner with the family, kind of do what I need to do with them, make sure they have, their showers, dinner, bedtime, and all that. And then I'll work a little bit more after that. And I choose to do that on purpose. It doesn't work for everybody, but it works for me because it's sort of the rhythm that I get in to make sure that work fits into my life.
Yep.
And I've been very clear about that with the folks that I work with about that's how I operate.
Yep. And that's how they're going to get the best of you.
Exactly.
Right.
Because, having me sit at a desk from, 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock is not going to be productive for me or for them. And the great thing about it is that it just seems to work well for me. I clearly communicate to everybody around, how I work. This is the way that I, plan my days. And people generally, are accepting of it and open to it. And then, we just go forward from there.
So the evaluation piece of what your priorities are and your values, right? Because and the values in not just, kind of what you most value in life.
Yeah,
right?
and I think those change over time too. Prior to having children, I think how I work might have looked a little bit different. So one of the things that I like to do, I like to run. I used to run quite a bit. When you run a lot, it takes a lot of time. So again, if that were my current priority right now or the thing that I valued the most, I would figure out, where would I get my long runs in? How would I schedule my days in order to fulfill that need for myself and then fit the work stuff around it? I think oftentimes we go to the default of putting work first and then figuring out how the rest of it, my spin on it or my take on it is, let's think about it the opposite way.
Yeah.
And then make sure that it works for you.
Yeah.
And the other part of it too is making sure that we check in. Checking in with yourself to make sure, is this working for me?
Yep.
Am I getting what I need? Am I getting what I need personally? Am I getting what I need professionally? And checking in with the others around you, with your spouse or your partner, with your children. Are they getting what they need from you around, kind of piecing this work and life situation together? And then lastly, checking in with your employer too.
Right.
How's this working? And I think the thing is, we also have to be flexible about how we think about it, in terms of some days are going to be better than other days around it. Sometimes we're going to have to change on the fly,
right?
And we have to just be prepared for that.
Yep.
But for the most part, I think if we articulate what our needs are around, our life first and work around that, hopefully we can get to a good outcome.
Yeah, and that could lead into if those check-ins with yourself, with your family, or your employer, if any of those it's not working for,
right,
that's an opportunity for potential change.
Yes.
Right? To be able to say this might be the pivot point for something to change.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely.
And reset expectations for the people that are involved.
Yeah. And like I said, I think this is going to look very differently for a lot of different people, just based on what your own personal priorities are. But the thing is, I think people oftentimes look to get permission to do this kind of, work-life balance or make work fit in. And I think the key is also just doing it, not necessarily asking for permission to do it, but insist or put out there, this is how I like to work. Instead of asking permission, can I work from home 2 days a week? Can I do this or that? But, really kind of putting it out there and owning it.
Yeah.
And then see what happens from there. You might get a yes and you might get a no, but at least you're true to what's important to you.
And starting those conversations.
Right.
Right. You'll never know what the answer is unless you start those.
Yeah, and especially in today's marketplace too, there are so many opportunities out there and, technology, things that can aid us with how we work. There are a lot of different ways that we work now. Nobody sits in an office for 10 hours a day, or not very many people do that anymore, So the new ways that we work, this might be sort of a part of that as well.
That's great. So it is a really important topic, and it can be a really kind of stressful topic for people too.
Yeah. Again, I think it's because people, don't always feel like they can or are afraid to ask, or they're afraid that they might not advance in their career because of, a particular ask that they want or something like that.
So what was the conversation that you had with either your current employer or your previous employers about the evolution of your kind of work kind of life that you needed to manage?
Yes. Again, I started with a new employer a couple months ago, and in the very beginning of the conversations that I had with them, here's how I like to work. And I had that conversation with the person who is now my manager, who's my vice president, who's my client, in that interview process, because I wanted to make sure that they understood where I was coming from, and that if I were to come work at this company, that it would have to work for me.
Yeah.
Again, it had to work for me. Otherwise, I couldn't make it work.
Right.
And so I was very clear at the very outset around that. They were all very open to it, which was fantastic.
Good.
And I feel very grateful that they were. And I feel like I do what I need to do, and I'm getting great results at work already.
That's great.
And so, and they see that and they recognize that, and I own my own life.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure that they appreciated it too, because one, being so transparent up front, right? Because, like you said, some people feel like they can't approach the subject because they're concerned that it could, it's it's not a red flag, right? It shouldn't be seen as one. But if you had been presented with a response from them or from any employer for that matter, where they said, absolutely not, that does not work with our culture or with our business needs, then that's a sign for you to be able to step back and say, am I willing to negotiate on this?
Yes.
And if the answer is no,
then that's not the right place for me.
It's the process of elimination where you can say, well, that's just not for me. It may be for someone else that's in a different life stage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's great.
And again, I think it's about figuring out what your priorities are, at different life stages. Early in career, people might think about this a little bit differently than somebody who might be later in their career.
Yep.
So I think it really is very personal.
Yeah.
When people always say, how do you figure out this work-life balance thing? And it's like, there is no answer to it. The answer is really innate in you and in what it is that you desire and what you wish for.
And it ebbs and flows.
Yeah, and it ebbs and flows.
Because life changes.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and there are instances where for those listeners that may be feeling like they need a little bit more flexibility right now, that it is okay, like you said, to give yourself permission to even start thinking about that kind of stuff.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be a scary proposition.
Right.
It just may not be this most comfortable kind of evaluation that you have to do. But in going through that, you may actually come out on the other side way better for it. And likely will, because you'll get more life satisfaction too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the key too. And I think when those questions, if you were to propose that question to an employer and they said no, there's a digging in process. Why not? Or what would happen if?
Yep.
And propose those kinds of scenarios. And if you have a good relationship with the manager or the leader, going down that path of discovery is often good too.
Yeah.
It might open their eyes to something new and different as well. And the way that I think about it too, nothing has to be forever. You can try something.
Yep.
Maybe it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You try something else. Maybe that doesn't work either. You try something else. You kind of, figure it out until you find something that feels great for both you and the other team. Hopefully there's a big win for everybody.
Yeah.
Because I know that because of the things that I put in place for myself here at my new employer, they're going to get good outcomes.
Yeah. Because they're getting the best of you.
Yes, exactly. Because if I had to do something or be somewhere all the time, I wouldn't be putting my best foot forward. I wouldn't be putting my best person forward because I would be thinking about what I needed to do for my kids or what I needed to do for my husband or for myself, all of those kinds of things.
Yep.
And being in a place where, I can do what I need to do is very empowering.
And so it sounds like you're looking to minimize or mitigate the risk of distraction.
Yeah.
So you know that if you're required to fit within this certain kind of box of how someone has identified or defined what a work life means, that you're not going to be able to rid yourself of the distraction if you don't have that fluidity that's going to manage for your life as well.
Yep.
That's great. So we're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, we're going to talk to Sharon about some of the guidance that she'd provide some of her employees if they were actually wanting to approach her about how they can fit their work into their lives.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
So welcome back to The Career Q. We're sitting here today with Sharon Chin, and Sharon's talking to us about fitting in work into your life. And so, Sharon, you talked a lot before the break about the great flexibility that your new employer has been able to provide in order for you to be able to fit your career into your life. You are a people manager. You have employees that report into you. And so what are some of the things that, someone's sitting there, well, I don't know that I could go to my manager about this. Or I would imagine that it would provide more balance if I had XYZ. How do you start those conversations?
I think it's a matter of finding the courage to be able to do it. And I think that there's a few initial things that you can start thinking about when you want to have that conversation with your manager. First and foremost, think about, what is most important to you? What is it that is the priority that's driving your life right now that you want to be able to have that flexibility? So really being clear on that, whether it's I want to be more healthy, and so that's going to require time for me to do XYZ. I want to spend more time with my family, and that requires me doing these things. Or whatever it is that's important to you, identify that and be able to clearly articulate that. Secondly, I think when you're ready to engage in that conversation with your manager, first of all, be clear about what that priority is and ask for what you want and what you need. Don't look to the manager to provide answers for you, but for you to be able to provide the solution up front.
That's great.
Yeah. And I think, putting that out there and making sure that they understand your point of view and what it is that you want is essential. I've had employees come to me and be like, I have too much work to do. I don't know what to do. I have so much other stuff going on in my life. I just don't know how to manage it. I can't solve that problem for them. I might be able to help them think through it, but ultimately it's up to the individual to be able to solve for that. And so when you're entering in a conversation like that with your manager, come with a solution and be able to flex with that solution too. It might look a little bit different in the end, but not having your manager solve the problem for you is probably the right thing there.
Yeah.
And I think once you determine that and have that agreement with your manager, communicate it to your stakeholders, communicate it to the people that you work with, communicate it to the people in the rest of your life, to your family members, your spouse, your partner, to whoever, that this is how I'm going to be working going forward. And then try it, pilot it, make changes as needed, be flexible with that, and then check in. Check in with your manager. How's this working for you? Check in with your family. How's this working for you? And check in with yourself.
Yeah. Are
you getting what you need? Are you feeling good about how things are going with your life and how work is fitting into that life? So, and I think that's really important because if you've made this declaration, this is how I want to work, and then it doesn't feel good, that's not really a win for anybody.
Right.
So I think the thing is, again, testing it against yourself. How does that feel? Does that feel like the right thing for me right now in my life? And if it feels great, then you've kind of hit that sweet spot. And if it doesn't, again, flex, make the appropriate adjustments that you need to.
And so when it comes to sitting down with your manager and going in with the solutions, right? Don't go in complaining about the problem.
Right.
Offer the solution. Is it helpful to kind of prioritize the elements of that solution to understand what you would be willing to negotiate? So if you go in with I'd like a more flexible work schedule, there may be 3 or 4 things that you would feel, if you had the pie in the sky, right? The perfect situation. Yes. But maybe numbers 3 and 4, you would be a little bit more open to more flexibility when it comes to that. So going in and demanding, I have to work from home 2 days a week or I'll quit, is certainly not the right
That's
approach.
really probably not the approach to take. You might not get the answer you want.
Yeah, you can certainly go in doing that, but you're not going to get what you want.
Right.
But because it is it can be a truly emotional, right, decision, have an emotional impact on your life. It's kind of checking in and going in with what's the right thing for the business?
Right.
What's the right thing for me? And how can we find a win-win for both sides?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think it's just being really open and honest with the person that you're talking to about it too. Making sure that, yes, this is my pie in the sky and this is why it's important to me. And really being honest with that.
Yep.
And then again, that need to flex either way. So you might not get the pie in the sky, but you might get the 2 and 3, and that's that flex piece there.
And whether it's existing career, new job, whatever stage you're in, kind of understanding what is important. And, on the job search side, if you are looking at a prospective employer and they are very clear on their side, very transparent about the fact that it is 8 to 5. And if you can't manage that, right then that it's not the right fit for you. And we mentioned that earlier. But is it possible to look around in your network or in your community and see someone that perhaps is emulating a similar situation that you'd like to present, asking them, how did you approach your employer? What does that schedule look like? Do you feel like it is successful, right?
Yes.
Because if someone's pioneered that before you, maybe you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right?
Yeah.
Did you do that? Was there someone that you had recognized or that was doing something similar?
I just knew what I needed for myself. I feel like from that perspective, I really knew what I wanted. And I knew what to ask for. And I knew that it wasn't even asking. It was essentially me making that declaration and then seeing how people responded to that declaration.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, I've gotten very positive responses to it. And I think it's because of the approach that I've taken too. I've checked in with all the stakeholders around how I work. I've made it very clear from the very beginning how I like to work. And I get the job done.
Yeah. So very purposeful.
Right. Very purposeful.
Yeah.
So
with intent. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So on the flip side of that is that there are certain industries where there's not really a checkout or a clock off time.
Yes.
And so we may have some folks out there that are kind of expected to be available 18, 20 hours a day.
Yeah.
And what I really need is to be able to have dinner with my family.
Sure.
And approaching that conversation. And I'm sure the rules apply. The same rules apply, right? Being transparent and giving yourself permission to bring it up. But I'm clearly guilty of this. When I think of work-life balance, I'm coming at it from someone that's trying to achieve work-life balance is someone that's working crazy hours.
Sure.
Right? But it could also be crazy hours 24/7, or it could be you need me there at 8, but it doesn't work with my kids' school schedule. Or you need me there till 5, but Jimmy's got soccer after school and I'm the only person that can take him, or whatever situation it is. So it doesn't matter. There's no clear definition of what not having work-life balance is because it's very individualistic. No one can say to you, work-life balance is XYZ.
Exactly.
Right?
Making it work for you is essentially the key. And I think it's the same thing. Again, identifying what's most important to you, asking for what you need, communicating it, trying it, and then flexing again around that. So in a scenario where, your employer needs you there from 8 to 5 o'clock every day and that doesn't really work for you, think about, why does it have to be 8 to 5 o'clock, and engaging in that conversation, with your employer about that. It might be, maybe I can do 7 to 4, maybe and asking why oftentimes can put that in place. Sometimes the answer might have been, because we always did it this way. Well, there's always changes that can happen for that. And I think the other thing around that is figuring out what's most important to you and then setting those boundaries for yourself and not being like, okay, they said I had to do this, so, I'll do it. But what are the boundaries that you want to put in place that's going to make you feel good about your life and how work fits into that?
That's great.
So I think that's really critical too. Try it, flex it. And if it can't flex for some reason, maybe you look at other opportunities. I know that's kind of worst case scenario, but I have found that when you have those open conversations, you might be surprised with what comes out from those.
Just from personal experience, work-life balance for me became a challenge when my commute became 2 hours each way.
That's a long time to be
every
in the car.
day, right?
Yes.
And when you start thinking about just the sheer number of hours spent in the car, which led me to being a lover of podcasts because it allowed me to stay productive while I was stuck in traffic. But that was one of those challenges because it had nothing to do with the work or the employer.
Yes.
Right. But it had to do with something that I was required to do in order to be able to get to the job that I really loved, and ultimately became one of the reasons why I had to step away.
Right.
Because it was no longer sustainable for me because it became an issue in my life.
And you figured out what was important to you.
Yeah. I mean,
you identified what that important priority is for you,
Yeah.
and then you made everything else fit in.
Yeah. This has been great, Sharon. I said this offline, but I'll say it for the record. I can name half a dozen people right now that would love to work for someone like you. just being open to the conversation. You use the word flex, and I love that because life is not linear.
No,
and
it's not.
There's so many changes that happen, either planned or unplanned. We just want to be able to live the best life possible.
Exactly.
If we can surround ourselves by people and employers that allow us to be able to shine to the brightest that we can possibly be, that'd be great. So
that's what we all hope for.
Exactly. We have a couple of questions that we ask each interviewer, kind of more on the lighthearted side, but just peeling back the curtain on who is Sharon.
Yes.
What was your first job, and what were some of the fundamentals that you took from that job that you still apply today?
Sure. The first job I had actually was working in my parents' restaurant. So my family had a business for about 30 years here in the Seattle area. And I started working there when I was 14. And, I was the hostess. I did the cashiering. I did all kinds of things. And I worked there for about 10 years until my parents retired and sold the business. So I worked there for 10 years all throughout high school and college and a little bit after college, while I was generally working another job too. So I always had 2 jobs during that period of time. And I think that really taught me mostly about time management. I got really good about figuring out, here's what I need to do here, here, and here. So, I didn't have a lot of free time, but I figured it out. Here's where I need to work. Here's where I need to study. Here's where I can hang out with friends. And it really taught me those skills to be successful later.
That's great. And and I'm sure with your downtime, hanging out with your friends, you definitely made the most of it.
Yeah.
Because it was so precious, right? So what have you read, listened to, or watched recently that you'd recommend?
I've been watching this show on TV. I'm not a big TV watcher, actually. I have no idea what day this show is even on TV because I watch it on DVR. But the show called This Is Us, have you heard about that one?
I have. I've actually got some girlfriends that love it.
Yeah, I don't know why, but it really spoke to me. It's just a TV show that is, it's about family. It's really human. And I think that's what really caught my attention mostly. It's a great interplay between like the past and present and like these complex relationships within a family. And they were just really, I don't know, it just really spoke to my heart. And so I've been really enjoying watching it.
That's great.
Yeah, and I've even actually sucked my husband into watching it too.
I have some girlfriends that their date night is watching it with their husbands.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Which we've had a couple of people indicate that the Gilmore Girls is their kind of guilty pleasure that they that they watch in their free time. But I think we might have to add this to the list of streaming shows.
It's a great new show.
That's
I've been
awesome.
enjoying it a lot.
So, Sharon, you're sitting down across the table. You're chatting with your 90-year-old self. What do you think she would say to you today?
I think she would say, pay attention to what's happening every day because the time goes by so fast. And just enjoy every moment of it and just be really grateful for the things that are in your life.
Yeah. And if it's not working out, move
flex
on.
and do something else.
I love it.
But I think, again, the time just goes by so fast. And, I know I'll be 90 here soon enough. So, and I think it's just, enjoying every day.
That's great. Yeah, and it's because it is so important. I mean, it's hard to believe how quickly the years go by.
They sure do.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Sharon. Thank you so much again for coming in.
Thank you.
On a snow day here in Seattle. And I love the conversation about opening up the dialogue or even having the dialogue with yourself.
Yes.
Right? Starting that dialogue. Don't go straight to your employer. Have it with yourself.
Right.
Bounce it off family and friends and folks in your network and just get the conversation started.
Yes.
So we'll have more information about Sharon's interview in the show notes at thecareerq.com, and we will catch you next time. Be sure to tune in.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
The Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media and recorded at Jack Straw Cultural Center in the gray and rainy Seattle, Washington.